This is BBC One. Now, the weekend news with Sophie Raworth.
Tonight at 10, former US President Jimmy Carter has died at the age of 100. A peanut farmer who became a president. He served in the late 1970s and later won the Nobel Peace Prize for his humanitarian work. Also tonight, mystery after this plane crashes in South Korea, killing 179 people on board. Devastated relatives wait for news at the airport. Whole families have been wiped out. 3 more people die in the English Channel in what is now the deadliest year on record for migrant crossings. New Year weather warnings, snow, gales and heavy rain over large parts of the UK. We'll have all the details. Good evening. In the last hour, it has been announced that the former President of the United States, Jimmy Carter, has died at the age of 100. He was the longest living former US president. He served in the White House from 1977 to 1981, a Democrat who first entered politics in the 1960s. He only served for 1 term, but followed his presidency with a career that included winning the Nobel Peace Prize for his humanitarian work. From Washington, Gary O'Donoghue looks back at his life.
As a candidate and as a president, I'll never tell a lie.
It was that sincerity and passion that propelled Jimmy Carter to the presidency. Leaving a naval career, he took over the family business in the Deep South. Growing peanuts made him rich. Turning to politics, he served 1 term as governor of Georgia before taking an underdog run at the presidency.
My name is Jimmy Carter and I'm running for president.
He campaigned on a platform to bind Americans' wounds after Watergate and Vietnam.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
An ardent feminist and environmentalist, he was ahead of his time on many issues. And in 1979, an iconic moment, joining hands with Israel's Prime Minister Menachem Begin and Egypt's Anwar Sadat, sealing the Camp David Accords. It was his finest achievement. But an energy crisis saw rocketing inflation, high interest rates and long lines at the pumps. On top of all that came the Iranian Islamic Revolution, and the hostage crisis which followed saw 52 Americans held in Tehran and 8 military personnel die trying to rescue them. That all made re-election nigh on impossible, and he lost 46 out of 50 states to Ronald Reagan in the 1980 election. But Jimmy Carter made more of his post-White House years than any presidential predecessor, setting up the Carter Center in Atlanta, building houses for the poor, and campaigning across the world for democracy and justice. 22 years after leaving office, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts. Only when he was past 90 years old did he tell a news conference, without a shred of self-pity, that cancer had spread to his brain.
I think I have been as blessed as any human being in the world with having become the President of the United States of America, and everything's been a blessing for me. So I'm thankful.
By his side for 77 years of marriage, Rosalind Carter was, according to her husband, his equal partner in everything. He made a rare public appearance from hospice care when she died. Jimmy Carter's legacy has been hotly debated and often revised, but few would dispute that America's longest-lived president gave, in his own words, his very best.
The former President of the United States, Jimmy Carter, who has died at the age of 100. Well, these are live pictures of the White House tonight, the flag already lowered to half-mast. Let's talk to Tom Bateman, who is in Washington for us. And Tom, this news just breaking in the past hour, but already tributes coming in.
Absolutely, Sophie. His family confirming the news in the last hour. His son, Chip Carter, saying that he died peacefully at home today. He was surrounded by his family. It had been known that in recent years he was being treated for an aggressive form of skin cancer, and the family had announced last year that he would be leaving hospital and receiving care in hospice. And you mentioned there, this was a life that broke a series of records, the oldest living president in US history. He was married to his wife, who he survived, as you heard from Gary there last year, married for 77 years. She died in November last year. In terms of his legacy, I expect in the coming hours we'll have statements from President Biden, President-elect Trump, and many others about the impact he made on this country, not just during his one-term presidency in the late 1970s, but also in the 4 decades of work that he did and dedicated to public service after that. I think his presidency itself will largely be remembered for a series of crises at home. It was a period of stagflation. Many Americans remember long lines at petrol stations in this country, and also a series of emergencies abroad, including the storming of the US embassy in Tehran and the taking of American hostages there in the late 1970s, a crisis that lasted over a year and a half, and in which he was involved in a botched rescue attempt in 1980. But I think the signature achievement and the legacy of Jimmy Carter will be around the Camp David Accords, a historic peace between Israel and Egypt, the first country to recognise and do a peace deal with the Israelis back in the late 1970s. Both Menachem Begin of Israel and Anwar Sadat of Egypt, of whom Jimmy Carter was shuttling between at Camp David at the time, got the Nobel Peace Prize, as did Jimmy Carter many decades later.
Tom Bateman with the latest there from Washington. Thank you. A plane carrying 181 people has crashed in South Korea, killing all the passengers on board. Only 2 people who were flight crew at the back of the plane survived after it burst into flames. The plane, operated by Jeju Air, was arriving from Thailand when it skidded off the runway and hit a wall at Muan International Airport on the west coast of the country. From there, our correspondent Jean Mackenzie has sent this report, which contains some distressing images from the start.
The terrifying moment the plane lands at speed without its landing gear down and careers down the runway, unable to stop before crashing into the perimeter wall. It explodes, instantly engulfed by flames and thick smoke. None of the passengers stood a chance of surviving, the fire service told their families, as their bodies were slowly recovered. Only the 2 air stewards at the back could be saved.
We're at the perimeter of the airport now, and this fence behind us and wall is what the plane crashed into when it overshot the runway. And just behind me you can see the blackened, charred tail of the plane sticking up. Now, this is the only part of the aircraft that is still intact. The rest has been so fractured and splintered that the fire service have said that it's unidentifiable.
Inside the airport terminal, the families gathered to hear the terrible news. This is now a roomful of incomprehensible heartbreak as they wait for the bodies to be identified. Many were returning from a Christmas spent in Thailand. For Mr. Mang, it was the first time his great-nephews had ever been abroad. They'd gone to celebrate the youngest taking his college entrance exams, he tells me. Their father took them. The boys were so smart and he wanted to treat them. I can't believe the whole family has just disappeared. My heart aches so much. The boss of the airline bowing to express his deep regret. This is the first fatal crash in his budget carrier's 20-year history.
I want to give my sincere apology and condolences to those who've lost their lives in the accident and their families. At the moment, it's hard to presume the cause of the accident, and we have to wait for the official investigation result from the authorities.
It's thought the pilot couldn't activate the plane's landing gear. Initial reports suggest a bird might have caused a fire in one of the engines. But proper answers will take time. As the sun set, forensic teams were still searching the surrounding fields until eventually all the bodies were recovered. This tragedy couldn't have come at a worse time for South Korea, in the midst of a political crisis that's seen 3 leaders in 2 weeks. Today, the interim president called for a week of national mourning to respect these families who'll sleep here tonight as they wait and hope for more information. Jean Mackenzie, BBC News, Muan Airport.
We can go live to South Korea and join Jean, who is at the airport. And Jean, it's still very unclear why this plane crashed.
Yes, it is, Sophie. What we know is that the pilot had to make an emergency landing. He doesn't seem to have been able to activate the plane's landing gears, but we don't know why this was. And there are reports that a bird strike caused a fire in one of the engines, but there is still an awful lot about this that doesn't make sense. Birds don't usually cause huge planes like this to crash. There are measures built in to protect against this sort of thing. And this was an experienced pilot. And South Korea has a good air safety record. You know, it does have a good record on these things. Now, we are at the crash site now, and the black boxes have both been recovered from the plane. So that's the voice recorder and the flight recorder. But I think it's going to take some time until we get the full answers on this, because the flight recorder has been severely damaged. So they're saying it could take months to get the data off that. Also, it is taking some time to identify the rest of the bodies. The forensic teams are now taking DNA from some of the families. As you saw in our report, many of them have slept here up at the terminal building overnight. It is now Monday morning here in Korea. And as I've been saying, this couldn't really have come at a more difficult time for this country. It is a period of huge political instability and uncertainty after the country ousted its president just 2 weeks ago when he tried to declare martial law. So it is a huge challenge now for the country's interim leader, who's only been in charge for just over 48 hours, and a huge tragedy for this country.
Jean McKenzie with the latest there from South Korea. Thank you. 3 people have died as they attempted to cross the Channel in a small boat to the UK from France. 45 others were rescued. The United Nations says 2024 has been the deadliest year for migrant crossings in the English Channel, with 77 people losing their lives. More than 36,000 people have made the crossing this year, including almost 1,500 in the past 4 days. Today's incident happened off the coast of Sangatte, a few miles from Calais. Francis Reid reports.
A rescue from deadly waters. The sea between France and England has been calm for the last few days. A false sense of security for those making the perilous journey across. Boats often completely overloaded. Emergency services were called to a small boat in trouble before the sun even rose this morning. They saved 45 people, but 3 others died.
Unfortunately, the toll is very high. We've just had another person brought to us who has died, and we believe there may be more, as the beach is still being combed by helicopter and off-road vehicle. We always expect the worst, and it happened again today at Sangatte.
On land, wrapped in emergency blankets, those who survived the bitter temperatures. Dame Angela Eagle, the UK Minister for Border Security, said the government was supporting the French authorities, and this afternoon was among those blaming criminals for overloading people into unseaworthy vessels.
There was a group of around 50 people who were due to take the boat, and there's another group who came on the boat. This created panic and overloaded the boat, and families were apparently separated.
The English Channel is the busiest shipping lane in the world. Hundreds of vessels pass through it every day, dangerous even when the sea seems still. With temperatures so low, even minutes in the water can prove lethal. A UN agency saying it has been the deadliest year on record. This has become all too familiar. Francis Reid, BBC News.
4 boys aged 17 have been arrested on suspicion of murder after an 18-year-old man was stabbed to death in Derbyshire. Emergency services were called to an address in Ilkeston last night after reports of a stabbing. Derbyshire police say the man died on Hena Road just before 9 o'clock. 4 17-year-olds were detained, along with a 52-year-old man and 2 girls aged 15 and 16, who were all arrested on suspicion of assisting an offender. All of them remain in custody. Israel's military has said approximately 5 projectiles have been fired from northern Gaza into Israeli territory. It follows an Israeli strike on Al-Wafa hospital in Gaza City, which Hamas authorities say killed 7 people. The Israeli military claims the hospital was being used as a Hamas command and control centre. Shama Khalil reports from Jerusalem.
Another Gaza medical facility turned into a bomb site. After an Israeli airstrike, some patients were taken out of the Wafa hospital in body bags.
Imagine, we are now transferring the injured and the martyrs from one hospital to another. And why? Because this hospital was bombed by the other side.
The Israeli forces confirmed the strike, saying the attack targeted Hamas fighters who were using the building as a command and control center, adding that the building was not serving as a hospital at the time. But an eyewitness we've spoken to said there were patients and medical staff inside the hospital. Shok Dalul, a fourth-year medical student, was inside the hospital with her colleagues when it was bombed. She tells me they were getting ready to sit an exam.
There was glass everywhere, dust and smoke. We took cover under the tables and then fled. We were all shocked. We didn't know what was going on. We're just students here for an exam, and this is a hospital. We saw medical staff. We also saw patients, some in wheelchairs, some being carried by their families.
And this is where the wounded were taken. Al Ahli Arab Hospital, which was hit by Israeli artillery shelling earlier today. The Israeli military made a similar claim about the Kamal Adwan hospital, saying it was a Hamas stronghold. On Friday, the hospital was evacuated, and the Israeli forces detained and interrogated dozens of the medical staff and its director, Dr. Hussam Abu Safiya. He's still being held. Kamal Adwan was the last functioning hospital in besieged northern Gaza. North Gaza's medical facilities and its staff have been overwhelmed for months. With limited resources, next to no aid, and relentless bombardment. And yet, they gave hope to those desperate for help. But even that hope is being crushed. Shaima Khalil, BBC News, Jerusalem.
Massive waves have been pummeling the coasts of Ecuador and Peru, leaving scores of ports closed and at least one person dead. Jetties and public squares have been submerged in some parts of Peru, with residents fleeing to higher ground. The waves are being blamed on persistent winds off the coast of the United States. Graham Satchell reports.
Anxious fishermen and their families watch in disbelief as their whole fleet is destroyed by an enormous wave. Much of the coastline of Peru has been battered like this since Christmas Day. Boats tied up near the shore were just as vulnerable. You can hear the panic as villagers do their best to save their vessels. In some places, the water came hundreds of meters inland, damaging shops and people's homes. The sea is already reaching the houses, this man says. Not only that, but there are fishermen and brothers at sea whose situation we don't know. We have never experienced this. The Peruvian government has closed the beaches along most of its coastline to limit the damage. Here, people run for their lives as another huge wave threatens to destroy this boardwalk. Authorities say climate change is responsible for these extreme conditions, as waves of more than 14 feet high continue to pound the coast. Graham Satchell, BBC News.
Now, the Met Office has issued multiple weather warnings here, with heavy rain and snow forecast in Scotland from midnight tonight. High winds in Edinburgh forced the cancellation of tonight's torchlight procession, which was supposed to mark the start of 4 days of Hogmanay celebrations. There are weather warnings in place for rain, snow and strong winds for parts of the UK on New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. A series of yellow alerts will come into force in Northern Ireland, Northern England and parts of Scotland from Tuesday. We will have full details on all of that in a moment with Ben Rich. But first, to the football. And with the teams at the top of the Premier League in action today, Jane Dougal has more on that and all the rest of the day's sport from the BBC Sports Centre.
Hi, Sophie. It's been a busy day in the Premier League, but if you don't want to know the results, it's time to leave the room because Match of the Day follows shortly on BBC One. Liverpool will start the new year 8 points clear at the top of the table after they thrashed West Ham 5-0 at the London Stadium, Mo Salah scoring his 20th goal of the season. Elsewhere, there were wins for Crystal Palace and Nottingham Forest, draws for Fulham and Tottenham. In Scotland, Celtic extended their lead at the top of the Premiership with a 4-0 victory over St Johnstone, while Rangers rescued a point against Motherwell. The hosts were leading 2-0, but 2 second-half goals for Hamza Egaman ensured it finished all square at Fir Park. Dundee United's Kevin Holt scored a 94th minute winner to beat Aberdeen 1-0 at Tannadice. Elsewhere, Ross County and Hearts drew, while there were wins for Hibs and Dundee. In rugby's Premiership, Exeter Chiefs got their first win of the season to take them off the bottom of the table. They beat Gloucester 22 points to 15, as Patrick Geary reports.
For Exeter's young side, it must have felt like the walls were closing in. 8 games, 8 losses for Rob Baxter's men this season, just when you need something to fall into your lap. Gloucester obliged.
Frost is over.
That try, a cry of Chiefs' belief would take longer. First, they'd want reassurance, a few seconds of clarity. Tamati Tua delivered. 14-3 they led at the break, only to almost immediately invite Gloucester back into it. Gareth Anscombe allowed a gentle post-Christmas jog to the line. Winning can be about muscle memory. Gloucester had more of it. A push and a shove, and Jamal Ford-Robinson had them ahead. No time to resign to fate. Just 2 minutes later, Henry Slade nudged the Chiefs back in front. They hadn't won a league game since May, and Josh Iosefa-Scott had run out of patience. He was over, and so soon would be that wretched run. A bad Exeter year ends with hope. Patrick Geary, BBC News.
Novak Djokovic has said he's frustrated at being kept in the dark about Yannick Sinner's doping case. The world number one faces a possible suspension after testing positive twice for an anabolic steroid. Sinner insists he did not knowingly take any banned substance.
I believe in a clean sport. I believe that the player will do everything possible to be playing fair. And I know Yannick since he was very young, so he doesn't strike me as somebody that would do such thing. But I've been really frustrated, as most of the other players, to see that we've been kept in dark for 5 months.
You can keep up to date with the PDC World Darts Championship on the BBC Sport website, but that's it for now. Sophie.
Jane, thank you. Time now for a look at the weather. Ben Rich is here. That looks like the calm before the storm behind you.
Yeah, things getting a lot more turbulent over the next few days. After all the mist and murk and stagnant air of the last few days, in the approach to New Year, we are seeing things turning much more unsettled. In fact, a recipe that could cause some issues for New Year travel plans. Heavy rain and snow, strong winds, by the end of the week turning much colder. So yes, it is worth staying in touch with the forecast. There are already warnings from the Met Office. Read about those in full on the BBC Weather website. But the worst of the weather in the short term across Scotland. Very heavy rain, a lot of snow in the far north of Scotland. Cold here overnight, milder further south. So tomorrow morning, not a great start at all across the northwest of Scotland. Very heavy rain, still that heavy snow in the far north. That wet weather sinking southwards through the day. Some rain into Northern Ireland, Northern England. Over the tops of the Pennines, gusts of 60 miles per hour could cause some travel issues. Quieter further south. A little bit of sunshine, mild for most of us tomorrow, but not quite for all of us. Cold there in the north of Scotland, 5 degrees in Aberdeen. Now through Monday night, more heavy rain across parts of northwest Scotland, increasing that flooding risk. Some snow for a time, wet weather sinking southwards and eastwards through the day. And across this central slice of the UK for New Year's Eve, it is going to be very windy indeed. Calming down a little bit for a time if you are celebrating at midnight, but for New Year's Day, well, here comes another area of low pressure, and this one could bring some snow across parts of Northern Ireland, southern Scotland, northern England, some rain to the south, some strong winds, and as that all moves away, we all get into this much colder air. So New Year's Day, things turning colder in the north. Thursday and Friday, much colder for all of us. Single-digit temperatures, some wintry showers, frosts at night, but at least some sunshine. Sophie.
At least some sunshine. Ben, thank you very much. And that's it from us. It's time now for the news where you are. Good night.
Welcome to BBC London. I'm Alpa Patel. The festival of Hanukkah is being celebrated by Jewish communities